gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and I want to welcome you to this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, one of the things that we have come to expect since the secession of the disastrous debacle and fiasco known as the 2016 presidential election cycle was this idea that all of a sudden conservative values would become prevalent in the United States again, that we would embrace that which has been a strength for us for generation after successive generation. And of course, this comes after we had gone through, several successive election cycles at the presidential level where it was rumored by the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that conservatism was in retreat, that it was being defeated everywhere. And so, huge swaths of the American electorate went out in 2016 and wanted to leave an indelible mark on the electoral history of these United States. And if you recall, one of the things that the mainstream media kept reiterating time and again throughout the election cycle was that it was the election cycle that conventional wisdom would be thrown out the window and that it would be historic. And the reason they said it would be historic was that they thought that Hillary Rotten Clinton, Madam Clinton herself, would be the first female president of these United States of America. But the thing that really came to mind here, folks, is the idea that she was such a weak candidate, and that they were just so beholden to her, and that they believed so much about her, that it would somehow lend itself to being that she would be this great, wonderful president. But it didn't come to pass because the American people didn't trust Madam Clinton, and the American people didn't trust the Democrats anymore, and with good reason. When you stop and think about it in an objective fashion, you begin to see that what the Democrats were trying to do was to just run wholesale and unabashedly to the left, ever further to the left, at increasing amounts to the left. And why? Because they thought they saw a light at the end of the tunnel, which meant that their victory was within grasp. This is what we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been attempting to warn you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about for approximately 2 years. It's that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are going to do everything within their power to push down this dark and twisted narrative on the American people, repeating that whole thing of the Cloward-Piven principles. And if you recall, as we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes, Cloward and Piven were those two egghead academicians from Columbia University, who back in the 1950s and 60s had basically formulated a plan in which they were going to overwhelm the safety net and welfare state, or the entitlement state, that had been created by originally the father of the so-called American progressive movement in Theodore Roosevelt, Republican Theodore Roosevelt, at the turn of the 20th century, and then further entrenched by Woodrow Wilson and then FDR, and then by the 50s and 60s, the Truman administration as well, that they were going to basically overwhelm the system so that the American people would sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, this just isn't working, and that we need to redo everything, we need to revamp everything, thereby creating a permanent entitlement state that would work in tandem with this leviathan of an administrative state that they had created. And part of what all of that creates is this overburdensome, this draconian tax system, what they call the progressive tax system. And isn't it funny that that would coincide with the progressive political movement? It's all a bunch of subterfuge. It's all basically utilizing This dark and twisted game of semantics that we've been warning you about here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, dating back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015. And we have seen that in generation after successive generation, there has been this push to exponentially increase the bounds of the federal government to make it some sort of an end-all, be-all solution for problems that were created by the government in the first place. This is what socialism conjures up each and every time that it's attempted. And when we look back at it with a modicum of objectivity throughout the relatively brief yet illustrious history of these United States of America, we see that our foundational documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers, and the private and personal correspondence of the Founding Fathers, they would not support socialism, because socialism goes against the clear and concise language that's contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what's known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution states that it is the supreme law of the land. And therefore, anything that is contradictory or contrary to the clear and concise language within its four corners is void ab initio, meaning that it lacks the binding effect of law, the applicability of law from the very outset. But of course, those that apply Cloward and Piven, those who are just dead set on creating this leviathan of an administrative state that is all-encompassing, that is essentially going in and encroaching upon and intruding upon the facets of our daily lives, don't want the Constitution to be there. They see it as an obstacle. They see it as something that stops the ability of they themselves to create this special niche for themselves. And I know that I've also brought up on previous episodes this idea of the notion of socialism being New Age feudalism. In fact, that's what the great French philosopher and admirer of America during her halcyon days, during her opening decades, Alexis de Tocqueville, had said. He said that those who are proponents of socialism are actually pushing for a form of soft despotism, that it would be New Age feudalism. In other words, that it would create a caste system in which the elite, the governing elite, would carve out a special niche for themselves, thereby separating themselves from those who create the bedrock foundation and the backbone of this, our beloved republic, and would be a cut above it. Now, folks, as we all know, that old adage that has rung true for generation after successive generation, going all the way back to the foundation of this country well over 200 years ago, that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men, is completely ignored by this type of chicanery that has been promoted and has been crammed down our throats by the proponents of the Leviathan and almighty and all-powerful administrative state to create that type of separate caste system. And it's always funny, because they're the ones that sit there and say that they are for the little guy, that they're tired of people not paying their fair share, all of that phony baloney nonsense that they have just reiterated to the point of it being ad nauseum over the past several decades. I mean, it's basically been a little over a half century now. They're the ones that always push for increased government spending. And that means that they have to have increased taxes. That's why they want to push the so-called income tax reform, where they're going to close all the loopholes. Folks, essentially what they're saying is if you are a hard-working American who has been willing to go forth and put forth the effort and to place your assets at risk to create more for yourself, that your abilities and your hard work and effort leaves you with nothing, that it essentially requires the government to have a carte blanche to do anything. And that's the problem. They always turn, each and every time, they always turn to the government as being some sort of an end-all, be-all solution for our country and for any of the great myriad of problems that have been facing the nation. And it just isn't true. It doesn't come to the forefront of being proper. And I say that because when you stop and think about it with a modicum of objectivity, you must reach one inexorable conclusion, and that inexorable conclusion is that it's just sheer unadulterated greed on the part of the government. You know, they sit there and they lambast the private sector, the one that actually built this nation, as being greedy. Oh, they're greedy. They're the ones that don't care about the country, or they're just in it for themselves. You recall that during the 2012 election cycle, one of the things that Barack Hussein Obama had said when he was attempting to secure his re-election was that if you're a small business owner, you didn't build that. It was the government worker, the pencil neck, the pencil pusher in the nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable bureaucracies that have become a quintessential aspect and even foundational building block of this administrative state that is throttling the life out of the United States of America, both as a nation and people. They're what built your business because they built the roads and infrastructure and what have you. Now that's dunderheaded thinking. Particularly when you consider that what they're pushing for is for the centralized federal government to do all of it. And when we look at the proper tenets of federalism, which is more appropriately or accurately referred to as the proper interrelationship between the federal government and the respective governments of the several states, the federal government is, by necessity, by its very design, by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our Constitution, one that is limited. In other words, in order for it to have the proper, legitimate authority to act, it must trace said authority back to a power that was specifically enumerated unto it by the supreme law of the land or our shared United States Constitution. Unfortunately, that is not what we're seeing. We look at the way that both of the mainstay political parties are approaching the American system of polity in this modern, fast-paced era in which we live, and we see that neither one of them are dedicated to going back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language within the Constitution. In other words, the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has essentially become the Me Too party of socialism. They're pushing for it. Remember the bifurcated type of infrastructure spending that Trump had come up with? Oh, well, it's going to be okay because the private sector will be funding part of it, and then the government will be funding other parts of it. The same way that he wanted it to be with the so-called American Health Care Act. And one of the greatest concerns that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I reiterated during the election cycle, and indeed our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, had reiterated during the election cycle, was that if Donald Trump became the 45th president of these United States of America, he and his surrogates and acolytes would do everything within their power to fundamentally, drastically, permanently, and irreparably redefine conservatism. It goes right back to that dark and twisted game of semantics that the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned us about in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s and 60s, right at the same time that Cloward and Piven were doing everything in their power to undermine the American people, forcing the American people to turn to the government on bended knee to provide some sort of solution to a problem that government created in the first place. Now, folks, these are things that we can't ignore. And this is why the Never Trump movement had been so prevalent during the 2016 election cycle. But now we see that there are proposed gas taxes, there are proposed infrastructure spending plans, and there has been a push to once again exponentially increase the scope and boundaries and implementation of the federal government so that it is more intrusive than ever. But unfortunately, so many who had once been principled conservatives, meaning that they wanted to see a reduction in government, that they wanted to go back to the clear and concise language within the Constitution, are abandoning that. They have bought into this populist notion that has been championed by the so-called alternative right or alt-right, or as we prefer to refer to them here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, the alt-right, to push for populism. Now, populism, as we have discussed on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, is nothing short of a thin veneer for progressivism, which is also just a more polite or politically correct way of saying frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist. Now, all of these dark and twisted machinations and ideologies are detrimental to the country. They work against your best interests, they work against my best interests, they work against all of our best interests in our capacity as individual popular sovereigns in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And again, folks, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future, because we see that the Republican Party has been able to browbeat the conservative movement within its ranks to become essentially paper tigers. Remember, the conservative House Freedom Caucus had tried to stand up to that sham, that supposed repeal of the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, what was being touted as the American Health Care Act, because it didn't do what the Republican Party has been promising to do and has made a central tenet of its campaign platform for the past 4 successive election cycles, or 7.5 years. And then they had one amendment that just changed one thing to let the states, maybe, if they wanted to, opt out of Medicaid, the expanded Medicaid that was brought about by Obama. Now, folks, all of this is still some sort of a grand redistributive scheme to take from the healthy to give to the non-healthy, to take from those who have to give to those who don't have. And instead of being something that promotes people to create on their own, it is destructive. It is parasitic. This is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have always said that government does not create. It's part of the problem that we all have whenever we hear the government saying that they're going to create jobs. Government does not create jobs. That should be up to the free market. That should be what an independent society should do. And our founding fathers truly believed that. They truly advocated for an extremely limited federal government, because they innately and inherently understood that governmental tyranny is always abound when you give far too much credence, power, and authority in an unconstrained fashion to a centralized government. Stop and think about it. When we look back at the long, drawn-out, bloody affair that was known as the American War of Independence, our founding fathers were combating the centralized power and authority of the Crown and British Parliament. They were fighting this notion of virtual representation, because they felt that by not being able to have a say as to who could serve in either the House of Commons or the House of Lords in London, that they weren't being represented. Whereas the British Crown was literally sitting there saying, and the British Parliament as well, was literally sitting there and saying, because you are British subjects, you are represented by the Central Parliament, even though you couldn't have a say as to who your representative in that legislative assembly and body was. Really? That's where we have started to go again, and it goes with this new budget proposal. We see that David Leitch, over there at the Strident Conservative, released a piece on May 2nd. Said that GOP creates pro-Democrat, anti-conservative budget. And he starts his piece by saying that the GOP is no longer home for conservatives. And if you recall, dear passengers, that's one of the things that we warned would happen when Donald J. Trump went out there and essentially said that it is the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party, that it was basically his way or the highway, and that he didn't need us. That went against us. And it's just amazing because it told us then that he wasn't serious, that he wasn't really about conservative principles anymore. And that has been the problem for far too long now. It's something that we have encountered too much. It's something that shows no signs of dissipating at any point within the foreseeable future. And again, none of that plays to our best interest. But it's important to hear it from the man himself, just as a refresher to what he was saying.
Ryan's different. He's the Speaker of the House. He's the highest ranking elected Republican in the country right now. He's the chairman of the convention. Back in March, you said he'd pay a price if he didn't get along with you. What is that price?
Well, we're going to see what happens. He wants to meet. He'd like to meet, and I think we're meeting on Thursday, and we'll just see what happens. It's just more drama, but I think it's a mistake not to do this. We want to bring the party together. Does the party have to be together? Does it have to be unified? I'm very different than everybody else, perhaps, that's ever run for office. I actually don't think so. I think that
it doesn't have to be unified?
No, I don't think so. I think it would be better if it were unified. I think it would be there would be something good about it, but I don't think it actually has to be unified in the traditional sense. I'm going to do what I have to do. I have millions of people that voted for me because I have strong borders, because I want strong trade. I want good trade. I want trade. I don't want to be an isolationist, but what's happening with China, what's happening with Japan, what's happening with Mexico, they're just absolutely eating our lunch. It's a shame. It's terrible. So I have to stay true to my principles also. And I'm a conservative, but don't forget, this is called the Republican Party. It's not called the Conservative Party. You know, there are conservative parties. This is called the Republican Party. I am conservative.
Well, Trump swats away critics in his own...
So, what he's saying is he's a conservative. He's this great, bigly, wonderful conservative. Except he's not. And when he sits there and tries to say that there are these other conservative parties, I sure wish that he would have named them, because I'd sure like to know what those parties were. I don't know of any. Unless he's talking about perhaps the Libertarian Party, who put up the most anti-libertarian candidate in Gary Johnson in these past two election cycles, presidential election cycles. The Constitution Party, the American Party with Hoefling, I don't believe it. But he clearly stated, in no uncertain terms, that he didn't need conservatives. And I still recall, I had a dear friend tell me, when all of this was going down, that essentially he would govern as a conservative. There was nothing there to tell us that he wouldn't govern as a conservative. But nothing could be further from the truth. It really was not who we are as a nation and people. It really was something that went against the clear and concise language of the Constitution. And again, whenever we distance and divorce ourselves from the Constitution, that's when we begin to encounter these problems wholesale. And you remember, he sat there and said during it that we have strong borders, or that he had strong borders, and that's why people would sit there and support him. Well, no. He really doesn't. He really doesn't support those things, because this new budget that came out clearly indicates beyond a shadow of the doubt that he just doesn't believe it, because this new budget does not fund the border wall. It does not fund the things that he had promised, and that it continues to fund Planned Parenthood. Remember that he tried to attack the House Freedom Caucus when they first tried to stand up to him before caving, and saying that they lost their best chance to defund Planned Parenthood. It was for 1 year. 1 year. Again, this is just an attempt by the 45th president of these United States of America to bamboozle people, to throw out red meat, to try and convince the American people that what he's doing is standing up for them, that he is literally looking out for the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, when, again, nothing could be further from the truth. No, folks, all of that is bad. All of that works against our best interests, both as a nation and people. And unless and until we're willing to admit this and to come to terms with this, the bigger the problem's going to be. It's going to be one of those things that we cannot ignore. It's going to be one of those things that just keeps getting worse and worse with election cycle after election cycle, because again, we keep falling prey and victim to this dark and twisted mentality of voting for the lesser of two evils, as if that will somehow magically place us in a better position. But it won't. It can't. It is diametrically opposed to everything that we hold near and dear as a nation and people. And so we see that this budget comes out and it's proposing things like a $1 gasoline tax. Yet he's got the gall to go out there and claim that he is still cutting taxes? I fail to see how. I fail to see how that is the case. Because when we stop and think about it with a modicum of objectivity, we see that there is no way in hell that this is possible. Because again, what truly matters is the ability of the people to be self-accountable and self-reliant, and thereby self-determinate. When the people are self-determinate, when they are able to act upon these things in their own right, that is when we are best served. That is when this nation is at its peak. But it's highly difficult to do that when we have this leviathan of an administrative state just throttling us, tearing down our ability to think and to act for ourselves. That can't work. That doesn't work. It is a disaster waiting to happen each and every time that they attempt to apply it. But that's what they do. That is what they literally come down and believe. They being, of course, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. And they have infiltrated the rank and file of the Republican Party. They have pushed us further to the left. They have caused us to abandon the political platform and the political ideology and philosophy that we have adhered to over the course of the past half century at least. And for what? What does it gain us? The answer to that should be both open and obvious. It gains us nothing. It gives us nothing. It leaves us in a dark, dangerous, untenable, and unsustainable place. And unless and until we, in our capacity as United States citizens, begin to awaken to this reality, begin to address this reality, these problems are only going to grow worse. But back to what Leach was saying. He said, only yesterday, meaning 2 days ago, I shared how conservatives no longer have a home within the GOP, he says. He said that he reached that conclusion after he saw the House Freedom Caucus cave to threats from Donald Trump and the gutless opposition party establishment for endorsing the fake repeal effort. He also saw this in the way that the Heritage Foundation is now ousting Jim DeMint and potentially putting Stephen K. Bannon in there. Now, folks, we've already done a program exposing just how dangerous of a dark and twisted sycophant Bannon is. We cannot ignore these dangerous developments because they are real. They are real threats that cannot be ignored, that are growing worse with each passing day, and unless and until we, in our capacity as United States citizens, are willing to address this, these problems become permanent problems. I know that Jeremy likes to say that the only way that something transforms from being an issue, which has a solution, to a problem is when there's no solution. But in this case, it becomes a problem because people ignore the solution. They don't want to take the necessary steps to grasp the solution, to unlock the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, bondage, servitude, but above all, oppression, because they have been led so far astray, they have been so blinded by this mere spectator sporting mentality that has consumed the American system of polity that they no longer know how to act. They no longer know where to go. And that in and of itself is dangerous. I say it's dangerous because it works against us. It places us in a very untenable situation. And one that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future because, again, we see that the Republican Party, as Donald Trump said, is not the conservative party. In other words, they're kicking conservatives to the curb. They are downtroddening us, they are demoralizing us, they are marginalizing us because they do not like what we stand for. They have essentially become, as I mentioned earlier, the Me Too party of socialism. They have embraced that as a titular part of who they are. And therefore, we are just useful idiots, cogs in the political machine to help them assume a position of power and to maintain that position of power at the great expense of we the people. Because they immediately cast us off just as soon as they have secured their election. That's what it comes down to. That is the dark and twisted reality that we are facing both as a nation and people. And again, it's not changing. But Leach went on. He said, so it should come as no surprise to learn that the GOP establishment reached an agreement with Chuck DeSchmuck Schumer and Nasty Pelosi to create a $1.1 trillion spending bill funding the government through September. What in the hell has happened to the conservative movement? What has made us turn to these charlatans, to this sort of chicanery to maintain the status quo. Folks, we can't afford to do this. We cannot afford to allow our country to continue to traverse down this untenable path because it is going to lead to ruination each and every time. I wish that weren't the case. But when we stop and think about it with a modicum of objectivity, what other conclusion can we draw from this? What other viable solution is there? What other thing that makes sense really works with that? The answer to that is there is none. There is no other way to describe exactly what it is that has been ailing and afflicting these United States of America for so long. Because remember, one of the things that Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan, the current Speaker of the House of Representatives and one of the lead of the golden herd of rhinos, was doing back in 2012 before he had been selected to be the vice presidential candidate with failed candidate Mittens Romnikins, was he was going to balance the budget. We had to stop raising the debt ceiling, this, that, and the other. They always bark loudest when they feel that they have the pulse of the American people and that they think that they don't have to actually follow through with it. They can just sit there and say, well, look, we gave it a good faith effort. We gave it our best shot, and, well, you know, they kind of sort of shot us down, but, yeah. Folks, that kind of bovine excrement, mixed with equine excrement, is what has alienated and disenfranchised huge swaths of the American electorate. That is what has led to the crescendo of anger and bitterness that fueled the 2016 presidential election cycle and allowed Donald J. Trump to become president of these United States of America. And recall that they had said, well, we are supporting him because he's not a politician, he's a straight shooter, he's an outsider, he'll drain the swamp, this, that, and the other. Well, what of it? What has come of it? What benefit has it delivered unto the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours? The answer is there is no tangible result. There is nothing that has built us up. There is nothing that has truly begun to rekindle American prosperity. Now, yes, there are parts of the proposed tax plan that are good. Elimination of the estate tax or the death tax. I mean, the government taxes us for living, the government taxes us for making a living, and the government has been taxing us for dying. It's so that the only two assured things in this life on God's green earth is death and taxes. But that's not a good thing. That's certainly not in line with no taxation without representation, because when we look at it, the way that the House Freedom Caucus had caved on this so-called faux repeal effort of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, that's not representing their constituents. Their constituents voted them in for the past 4 consecutive elections to completely unravel and overturn Obamacare. But they think that our attention span is so short that we aren't paying attention. They think that we are so gullible and so stupid that this isn't going to cost them. Well, when the 2018 midterm elections are going to come here, and folks, they're just rapidly approaching, there's going to be a bloodbath for the gutless opposition party, or GOP. How are they going to justify this to their constituents? Beats the hell out of me. Because they're not going to admit they lied. Well, it was never Trumpers. They got no way. Screw you. Screw you. It's time to stop blaming conservatives for everything that happens when you're attempting to embrace the Leviathan of the administrative state. Something that has a well-proven track record, well-established and proven track record of failure over the past 115 years. accomplish what they claim it set out to accomplish. It's not working in the best interests of the American people. That's nonsense. It's ridiculous. But above all, it has no place in an open, honest, but above all, free society like that of the United States of America. Folks, there's no way around that. That is what we are facing, both as a nation and people. And it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. So all of this is political kabuki theater playing out in a disastrous way, in a disastrous fashion, and again, it is we the people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, that are left holding the bag. Remember again that Alexis de Tocqueville had said that it, of course, being socialism, was just New Age feudalism, creating this static caste system in which there are those who are the ruling elites and the peons. And under this modern system, there wouldn't be the clergy aspect of it unless it's the clergy of that hoax of man-made global warming, that frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist religion. So why is it that we have so many who were at one time ardent believers in the Constitution, ardent defenders of the time-honored values, institutions, and traditions of this, our beloved representative republic, turning a blind eye to everything, ignoring the fact that there has been a hostile takeover of the conservative movement in an attempt to irreparably and permanently redefine it away from being what it has been for so long. It's because we have enough in this nation who simply don't have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution. And that is something that works against us. That is something that impedes us. It holds us back. It ensures that this leviathan of an administrative state stays in place without any repercussions for doing so. Now, folks, that will never work in our best interest. That will always be something that is a great detriment to we the people. And the sooner that we come to terms with that, the better able we will be to place this nation back onto the path to prosperity, because ultimately, is that not what we are all hoping to achieve? Is that not what we want? A type of American Renaissance that ensures that our nation and people are free from the tyrannical overreach of a Leviathan administrative state? But you see, Donald Trump continues to push to divide and conquer the Republican Party. He's pushing for everything that the Democrats were hoping to accomplish. And he has managed to do something that the Democrats have been unsuccessful with for generations. And that is to destroy the conservative Republican Party from within. It's as though we have a Trojan quaff. That's what we have. It's the Trojan quaff. Beware of real estate tycoons bearing gifts, because it's a gift that keeps on giving, and it's not the gift you want. You see, again, it's as that sagacious founding father Sam Adams said, we have to be a virtuous people if we expect our republic to remain a strong, vibrant, and robust republic. And being virtuous means that we have to live by a high standard of morality, that we cannot just turn a blind eye to the efforts of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists to peddle those twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, because again, that has been working to undermine us each and every time. But here's the interesting thing. Leach said that surrender was necessary according to the GOP establishment, Benedict Arnold, Paul Ryan, to avoid a government shutdown as promised by Democrats. Now, folks, let's think back to when Barack Hussein Obama was in the White House. And we think back to a government shutdown. The Republicans should have embraced that, saying that it was the Democrats that forced it. And again, the Democrats are going on record saying that they're forcing it. But instead, they allow the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to apply it to them. Now, we know, in the wake of the 2016 presidential election cycle, that the salivating mainstream media is not trusted. It has reached a point where it is just not trusted at all. No one believes what they say. It's all fake news. If Donald Trump were serious about basically promoting a conservative message and embracing the conservative ideology, he would sit there and use his stubby little thumbs to go out on the Twitter sphere and lambast the Democrats for shutting down the government. But he doesn't want to do that because, again, he sees the government as an end-all, be-all solution for the cornucopia of problems that we are facing both as a nation and people. And so, again, this plays against us, works against us, and leaves us in a dangerous spot. So unless and until we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, begin to stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity and put our collective foot down and say enough is enough, these people think they have carte blanche to continue to ratchet down with this sort of chicanery that is working against our best interests. And why is it that it is only the conservative movement in these United States of America that ever surrenders? Why is it that the Democrats are never brought to the carpet? Well, it's because they are fanatical in their commitment to this incrementalized push leftward of the United States. And so, again, it is the American conservative that is put on the chopping block. It is we, the people, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic that are forced to bear the brunt of all of this chicanery and madness. And folks, that's one thing that former President Barack Hussein Obama had right. When he went up there and smugly stated before the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that elections have consequences, yes, they do. And we are now suffering through the consequences of this 2016 presidential election cycle. And yes, folks, it is an ugly thing. It is not something that is good for the American people. It's something that works against us. It's something that has impeded our ability to promote the values that we have. We're going to have to find a way around that. We're going to have to find a way to better ourselves as a nation and people in a way that doesn't sacrifice our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because when you stop and think about just how bad a position we are in, it is not going to be able to be changed overnight. We can't turn to messianic figures to somehow magically pull us out of the problems that have erected themselves or have ballooned up to the surface. It is going to take a consolidated effort, a concerted effort on the part of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours to rekindle American prosperity. But when we have the government standing in our way, when we have our own supposed political party standing in our way, it makes it nigh impossible to achieve that. It leaves us in this barren position, for lack of a better term. And folks, again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. None whatsoever. And I wish that weren't the case. I wish that we had a leader who truly believed in the tenets of conservatism. I wish that we had have a leader who didn't believe that the government should pay for health care. And, you know, again, it's important to recall the things that Trump had said with it. I know we've played this clip before, but it's an important clip. It's an important clip that needs to be replayed because it cannot be pushed from the memory of the United States or of the American people.
What's your plan for Obamacare?
Obamacare is going to be repealed and replaced. Obamacare is a disaster. If you look at what's going on with premiums, where they're up 45, 50, 55%.
So how do you fix it?
There's many different ways, by the way. Everybody's got to be covered. This is an un-Republican thing for me to say, because a lot of times they say, no, the lower 25%, they can't afford private. But
universal health care.
I am going to take care of everybody. I don't care if it costs me votes or not. Everybody's going to be taken care of much better than they're taken care of now.
The uninsured person?
Right.
Is going to be taken care of.
They're going to be taken care of.
How?
I would make a deal with existing hospitals to take care of people. And you know what? This is probably...
Make a deal. Who pays for it?
The government's going to pay for it, but we're going to save so much money on the other side.
The government is going to pay for it. The government. The government knows best. The government knows how to fix things for us. Really? How does that work? How? How does that work for us as a nation and people? The answer is it doesn't. It doesn't work for us. It doesn't benefit us. That doesn't propel us to prosperity again. That's something that harms us each and every time. And again, none of it is in our best interest. None of it. It tells me, beyond a shadow of the doubt, that what Trump is attempting to do is literally place us on a path of increased government spending, of feeding this leviathan of an administrative state which works against the American people each and every time. And of course, that does not help us. It does not help us. It does not place us in a tenable position. It does not lift us out of the problems that we have been facing both as a nation and people. And so we're left to carry the brunt of it. We're left to essentially suffer under the weight of this Leviathan federal government. And in a way that cannot be overcome unless and until we all foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That's the only way that we can hope to place the United States back onto the path to prosperity. It's not going to be done easily. Not going to be something that we can accomplish overnight. But if there is any people on the face of God's green earth who is capable of achieving this, it's the American people. Because we have managed to overcome every hurdle, obstacle, and adversity that has ever been placed in our path during our relatively brief yet illustrious history on God's green earth. And so yes, there is all of these challenges. Or rather, there are all of these challenges. And yes, it is going to require a diligent effort on our part, but we can do it. So, what exactly did the Democrats get from this? Well, they got Planned Parenthood funding, funding for Obamacare subsidies, funding for sanctuary cities, fully funding the EPA, increased funding for Department of Energy green energy programs. In other words, the cornucopia of everything that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been pushing for. None of it is benefiting the American people. None of it is placing us in a better position or in a position that truly will allow us to succeed. Folks, this is chicanery at its absolute worst. This is political kabuki theater. And the Republican Party owns this one. Can't blame Obama for this. We can't, of course, they're not going to blame Obama for it. They're going to sit here and say it's the never-Trumpers. It's those who attempted to warn that he would do what he's doing now. How does that benefit any of us? How does that help any of us? Again, it doesn't. There is no benefit from any or all of this. You know what was not included on that list? Funding for the border wall. Remember, they originally said that, oh, we'll make Mexico pay for it, except Mexico didn't pay for it. Oh, crap. Well, maybe we'll pay for it. No. Not only that, they're going to allow dreamers to stay here, the DACA people, those illegal aliens who were children. You know, children who are older than me. I'm about to be 32. Some of these DACA kids, these wonderful kids, as Trump referred to them, are 36 plus years old. But they're kids. They're kids, and it would be so unfair, so intolerable, so insufferable if we sent them back for violating the law. And so you see, what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have done is they've managed to push us away from being a nation of laws instead of men to where we are essentially selectively enforcing our laws and abandoning our time-honored values and principles that we have adhered to as a nation and people going back to the inception of this nation well over 235 plus years ago. Folks, we can't ignore this. We can't just allow this to be the case. Because the moment that we allow this to become the new established norm in these United States of America, the more difficult it is ever going to be for us in our capacity as United States citizens to place this nation back onto the path of prosperity, to restore American prosperity. I wish it weren't the case, but how do we get around it? There's no way around it. So again, it is going to require that we be diligent. That is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer have been saying for almost 2 years now that the key to unlock the chains and shackles that have been inhibiting the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, has been with us since the inception of this country. It's our Constitution, and thereby it is so important that we foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our United States Constitution and also our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. And with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, it is part of the proposed budget that you have alcohol, so do enjoy. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We know you have choices out there for your radio venues and programs that fly you over the friendly airwaves, and we're delighted that you chose to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, please feel free to leave them either in the comment section on our YouTube page, or our Google Plus page, or even our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us over there on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, the Blogspot account, which is chock full of useful information, and just as you'll find in the description section of today's Solo Flight Special Edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, you will find the Cafe Press account, the link to the Cafe Press account. Folks, the Cafe Press account has all sorts of novelty items, trinkets, and goodies, with either our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo on it, our first class passenger logo on it, or even the two Uplifting America logos. Go ahead and take a look at that, folks. With such a wide array of products and at reasonable prices, you simply cannot go wrong with the Cafe Press account. And folks, thank you for flying with us. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.